All righty, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Corning Museum of Glass. Got a great crowd here in-house, and we also want to send out a big welcome to all those who are tuning in online with us as well. This is a live stream that we do occasionally throughout the year. We're just getting ramped up for our fall schedule, and Tom Ryder is going to be our master glassworker and first gaffer here today. Let's give him a big round of applause of welcome, shall we? Awesome, thanks so much. Now we also have a couple assistants here. We've got George and Jason will be helping Tom out with this piece. And my name's Helen. I'm going to be narrating the process. So if you have any questions, any curiosities, I'd love to chat with you both in-house. Just raise your hand, get my attention. If you're online, we can also ask questions there as well. So we've got Amanda on the computer here. So just type those questions into the bar there, and you'll be able to answer those live as we go along as well. But we're going to get started here just in the coloration process. We're going to be making a very special piece. One of the reasons that we do this particular live stream demonstration is it gives us an opportunity to, one, feature an artist. And Tom Ryder is, of course, an amazing local artist. He is also one of our employees here at the Corning Museum of Glass. So it's given us a chance to feature him a little bit in the work that he does on a personal nature. A lot of times during our demonstrations, our classic demonstrations, we're showing you amazing possibilities with this material, but it's a little bit shorter of a demonstration. So these longer and special demonstrations, especially these live streams, give us a chance to delve in a little bit deeper, show you some techniques that wouldn't necessarily fit into that original show schedule, and really be able to highlight some of the amazing qualities that glass has. We're starting out with a little bit of clear glass here. He is going to be introducing a bit of air pressure into that hollow stainless steel pipe to create a hollow bubble. But we're blowing glass a little atypically these days. Now, with wearing masks over the last year and a half, it's been very tricky to blow into blowpipes. So here at the museum, we shifted gears and are now using an air compressor system to assist us. So he has a blow hose that he'll attach to the far end of that hollow stainless steel blowpipe. We have an air compressor that's set only to about 1 or 2 pounds of pressure, pretty low pressure. And then there's a foot pedal down below. So as he taps on that pedal, it releases a little bit of air, and boop, there we go on our nice foundation bubble. So it's been a great system that's allowed us to blow glass, of course, regardless of restrictions. So we're really excited to be able to have that opportunity to do so. It's been really interesting to also see how other organizations and even individuals have approached this challenge, each one developing different technologies. Now, this blow hose system did exist in the glass world. It's not unheard of, but it's rare for a standard glass studio to use it. Now, he is letting this cool down just a little bit. We're going to start adding some color. We're going to be making a piece very similar to the one that we have here on the Marver. It's this beautiful black and red on the inside with a beautiful cane pattern on the outside. So right now we're going to start layering up the colors in the way that we see them. Now, anytime you're making a vessel that has an inside and an outside, which most vessels do, you don't always peer inside of them, but anytime you want to have that reveal, you really want to think about the order in which you put those colors on. So whatever you start with on the end of your iron will always be the inside of the vessel. So he wants this nice graphic red color on the inside. So he's going to put an overlay of that red color over the clear bubble that he started. So we've got our gentleman over here on the far end already warming up that color. Color comes to us in bar form. I thought we had a bigger bar here sitting here. I'll just grab one. I'll show you the original chunk that we played with. So this is the exact color that he's using. It is a coral red for those glass blowers out there. It is 69 Reichenbach. But we're using this beautiful red glass. But these glass, any glass, if you heat it too quickly or cool it too quickly, it'll end up cracking. Glass is very susceptible to thermal shock. That's when a material is trying to expand or contract as it heats and it cools. And so in order to get that color even on the end of an iron, we needed to warm it up slowly. So he broke off a pretty big chunk We put it into a pre-warming oven called a garage. And the garage can be used to pre-warm parts. It can be used to babysit parts. I consider it one of our glass babysitters. It's essentially a warm environment that you can put parts and pieces in, and they'll stay safe, warm, and happy inside of that garage as you're working on other things. So warming that red glass up nice and slowly, George was able to put it onto the end of an iron, and now we drip it nice and hot right over the surface of our bubble. So the overlay process is all about putting a thin veneer of color on the surface of your bubble. And so he's going to take this hot blob and try to squish it up around the surface of that bubble. Now he did allow the first bubble to cool down slightly and stabilize. That way he won't disform that bubble as he's working. Did we have a question online?
Yeah. Is it hard to work with these different colors? Don't they need different temperature ranges to work well?
That's a great question. So is it difficult to work with different colors? Don't each color have different temperature ranges? So thank you for your online question. So yes, color is very challenging. Every color acts a little bit differently in the heat. And red in particular is a very stiff color. So we have what's called stiff colors and soft colors. Now that just means that some of them heat up really quickly and maybe hold that heat a little longer, and other ones takes a little longer to get them hot, and they'll lose their heat a little faster as well. Some of it has to do with the metallic oxides that go into those raw materials. To make the colors, we just need our silica sand, soda ash, and limestone, the three main materials for our soda lime glass. And then we add colorants like cobalt. Cobalt would give us dark blue. Manganese would be for both purple glass and black glasses. He will be adding a bit of black glass to this, but most black glasses are actually just really dense purple glasses. Now we've got iron for green. Gold chloride gives us the beautiful pink colors. So different metals will melt at different temperatures as well. So that helps influence how those colors melt. But it also has to do with just the color. If it's a light color or a dark color, if we're looking at the way that heat absorbs or reflects off of that material. So if you're gonna go to the beach, do you wear a dark shirt or you wear a light shirt? You wear a light shirt, right? You want that heat to radiate off of you and not absorb into you so you don't feel real hot. So the light colors tend to be the stiffer ones as they reflect all that heat energy, and the dark colors end up being the soft ones as they absorb all of that heat energy. So putting colors next to each other, side by side, top and bottom, that can always complicate the process of blowing glass since everything's heating up a little bit differently. So this is part of the key to success with this overlay process as well, is to make sure that inner core stays fairly solid so he can push and squish it all over the marver table and get that to be a nice thin layer on the surface of that bubble without collapsing that inner bubble. Now, he did make it look pretty effortless, just rolling back and forth on that marver table. But there's a lot of finesse that's involved in the shaping of glass on that marver. It is a big metal table. Metal will rob heat away from the material as you roll over it. And as you're marvering, if the weight of the pipe and the glass itself is actually quite heavy as well. So if you just kind of let the weight of the pipe do some of that shaping, he'd end up with bald spots, thin spots, thick spots. So it's a fully supported activity, kind of dancing on the fingers, getting the angles that you want, predicting where you need that glass to move, and heating it accordingly to get it to move where you want it to move. I was told as my first professor that I should be able to marver on the wall just as easily as I marver on a flat surface. It's that controlled of a technique. So while he's getting this new fresh layer of red glass all squished around the surface of that bubble, George has already picked up the second color. This is going to be a double overlay. This is a great way of creating both, again, an internal and an external visual on our piece. So by overlaying another layer over top of this one, then we'll have that nice thin delineation between what we see on the inside and what we see on the outside. Now he is working with a dense opaque red, and the black is pretty dense as well. But if we wanted to start playing with color change, We could also start working with other transparents, other opaques, mixing and matching, layering them on top of each other. Now, they're not going to mix like predictable paints would. There are a chemistry involved. So instead, we can look at how they'll mix optically. So we've got lots of examples of that here. If we take a color on the outside, we can see that beautiful yellow. But on the inside, we've got a beautiful pink color. But when you look through that pink to the yellow below, it gives the illusion of a third color because of that translucency and that overlapping. So that is another potential highlight of glass. Glass is both transparent, opaque, translucent. Even opaque glasses blown really thin can get some luminosity and transparency to them because of that concentration difference. So we could be here all day long just doing color techniques and creating different patterns out of glass. But we're not going to be here all day long. This will take about an hour to make this beautiful piece. Yes, you got a question? Yeah, so the wooden spoon and water, what was that all about? So we have these wooden blocks, and these wooden blocks come in different sizes depending on how many gathers you have, because what they're meant to do is to help you organize glass, kind of put it back into a nice even shape. So when we do our fresh gathers from the furnace, we always go into one of these blocks to reinforce that even shape. But if you also got things a little bit off center and we still were in that nice consolidated hot glass type of moment, we could also use it to reshape that glass. But wood in general will just catch on fire when it's touching 2,000 degree material. So we don't use dry wood when we have really hot glass. Instead, we use wet wood. And the reason that we use the wet wood is that a nice little layer of steam forms inside. So it's something called the Linden frost effect. Has anybody ever taken a little water, thrown it into their hot pan just to test it, and you see that little water droplet dancing all over the pan? So it's hovering on a really thin layer of steam. So technically never touching the pan. So the same kind of thing happens with our wooden tools. We can have that little steam barrier inside. It pushes back at the glass, leaving a really nice smooth surface and doesn't catch our wood on fire, which would deposit wood ash onto the surface and really grab and stick to the glass. Our glass is really quite sticky when it's really hot, so you have to kind of be careful about what tools and toys you play with, otherwise you can end up contaminating your surface. So now he's allowed this red layer to cool down and stabilize, going through essentially the same process he did with the first layer. We want to make sure that core is nice and stable so we can drip our black layered glass right on top. Now, being a very soft color, this black glass, you'll notice, will be a little quicker in the way that he can shape it. It's going to heat up faster. It's going to stay softer a little bit longer. So he'll be able to do this overlay in maybe a little less time than what that first one did. I also want to point out that you might notice that that red glass didn't look anything like red glass, right? It looks more brown, and it will the entire time we're working with it. Just like our clear molten glass fresh from the furnace at 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit is bright orange, our colors always reflect their heat rather than their actual color. So this is going to look pretty brown and livery the entire time. But when it's finished and cooled down, it'll have that beautiful bright redness to it. Now the black will pretty much look the same the whole time. But one really nice thing about these dark colors is they often show the heat really well. So as we're forming this piece, we'll be able to see the glow of the temperature of the material, and that black will really show that off throughout the course of the process. But typically as beginners, you do not start with color. You start out all clear. You want to be able to see through that bubble, see where your thicknesses are developing, being able to see where you can stretch the glass and manipulate it. And the color itself can be kind of expensive. Since it's made with those metal oxides, things like iron, of course, that's like rust, so that's going to be a pretty inexpensive color. But that's still around $30 to $40 a kilo for those colors. If we're looking at things that use pink or gold chloride, those can be $90 to $150 a kilo. So when you're working with color, you're considering all of that cost, and a lot of times as beginners, you start out with a lot of green and blue glasses. Those are the cheap ones, but they're also really soft. So it's just finding that balance of what you can afford and what you want to play with as a beginner. Now we also have a couple furnaces up here. We do have our melting furnace. Our original melting furnace holds nearly 1,000 pounds of clear molten glass. And again, running at a high temperature of 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit, it stays soft and malleable, ready to play with at a moment's notice. We actually leave that furnace on pretty much all the time. It's been on since we opened this facility in 2015. Now the inside of that furnace has a big ceramic bowl that holds our glass, something called a crucible. And those do eventually wear out. The glass sort of eats through the side walls of that pot and eventually leaves a lot of pitted marks and eventually will just break through altogether. So you eventually tend to rebuild those furnaces after so many years of use. You start to see the quality of your glass go down a little bit in an older furnace. Some of those materials that are leaching out of the furnace into the glass itself starts to play around with the chemistry of the glass that you're melting. So we are scheduled to hopefully get a rebuild on this one within the next year or two. But generally, yes, you leave the furnaces on all the time. Now the reheating furnaces, where he's remelting the glass, there's no actual glass inside of there, so we can turn that off at night. It only takes about an hour or two to come back up to temperature in the morning, so we turn all the other equipment off when we're not using it. We also have a pipe warmer here. Our pipe warmer pre-warms the ends of the pipes. Pretty much hot things stick to hot things here in the hot shop. So if we don't have hot pipes and we go into that glass, it just sort of sloughs off the surface until that pipe gets hot enough to start gripping. So we pre-warm the ends of our pipes to make sure that they're all ready to go to be able to gather glass whenever we need. We also need to contain some of the explosions that happen from the residual glass that's left on those pipes. They're kind of self-cleaning. As the glass shrinks around the metal, it'll eventually pop and crack apart. So we contain all that explosions in a little bucket. So that's why all of our pipes are in a stand containing any of that cooling glass.
Yeah, how many gallons is 1,000 pounds of glass? I guess I need to know the
Ooh,
density.
how many gallons is 1,000 pounds of glass? I do not have that math in my head, but we're going to be doing a quick search on that conversion.
It's density. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's the thing. Different glasses will weigh different amounts, so having a weight for volume can also be a little off. But we're using a standard soda lime glass here today. That's the most common type of glass that you'll come in contact with on your daily life. And most glass that you come in contact with will also be machine made. But the manufacturing of glass is, even though it's a soda lime glass, which is again silica sand, soda ash, and limestone, you can change that chemistry just a little bit to give it different qualities. So for us, we want a glass that stays soft and malleable. We can play with it for long periods of time. So it's got lots of fluxes in it to keep it soft and malleable. If you're a bottle maker and you're trying to make thousands of bottles a minute on your machine, well, you don't want a glass that stays hot and malleable for long periods of time. It'd just be dripping all over the place and keeping your production from going quickly. So they'll formulate that glass with a little bit shorter working time. It'll set up a little faster and stabilize so that you can manufacture it just a little bit faster. Now, it's not to say that we couldn't take bottles and put them into our furnace, melt them, and create a tank of glass and blow glass out of that. There's many studios around the world that do that, but that glass is going to have a different sense of timing when you're playing with it. Kind of you have to work a little faster on some things, and there are some things that are just really, really difficult to be done out of such a stiff glass. For example, making goblets and little tiny delicate wares that you need all that residual heat to have this moments to be able to shape those little bits and pieces. That would be a very frustrating glass to try to play with to make things like that. All right, so it looks like we've got our double layer of color. So now it's time to start building up the clear layers. A lot of our objects might look solid, but if you were to break them in half and look at them, you would see that the color is generally just a thin veneer somewhere in the beginning, the middle, or the outside of that glass. The majority of our objects are built up with the clear glass, which is a lot less expensive, only about $1 or $2 a pound, depending on the manufacturer. Now, the melting of that glass, of course, is one of the greatest expenses, but we'll start building up lots of clear glass, maybe 3 layers on this one, maybe 2. We'll see how. 2 more on that one, and then 1 on the outside. So now that we're starting to build up those layers of clear glass, you can see he's done a beautiful job getting a nice even gather, but he'll return to those wooden blocks, just making sure everything is evenly distributed. We are creating a foundation for our piece, and that started all the way back at the beginning where he started that first foundation bubble. And if you're not careful about getting even layers, even heating, well, that means that there's going to be hot spots and cold spots. And the bubble will travel to wherever the glass is hottest. So if you set up uneven layers and uneven foundations, chances are you're going to end up with an uneven piece or have to fight it the whole time that you're working. So he'll build this up layer by layer, doing a few layers or allowing it to cool in between those layers, and also giving it just a little bit more air every time we do a layer. Now, we talked quite a bit about the wooden blocks, but we also have this wooden product made of newspaper. It's about 5 to 7 sheets. It kind of depends on the gaffer. I personally like thinner papers. I consider them a little bit more responsive. I can fold them a little bit easier in my hand and really use my fingers to help shape. But then George likes a little thicker paper. He likes to work a lot bigger. He likes to have more of a structure to that paper. So it really just is a personal preference for the gaffer. And everyone has a personal preference on how it's folded. Some people like to cut the corners to let the steam come out. Other people say, well, you don't cut the corners. That's immediately going to give you a steam burn. So you talk to 10 different gaffers. You're going to get 10 different opinions on what kind of paper they like. But in general, a nice folded newspaper is a really great tool to help shape the glass. I think a lot of folks gravitate towards it just because of that direct relationship that we can have with the material. As makers, we always want to touch stuff, but as glass makers, we learn not to touch stuff. So you want to make sure you're using tools that you're comfortable with in your hands, because those are the extensions that you have for making the products. So right back into our furnace. Now, one thing that they did for the earlier gathers, you might have noticed he took a tool and just sort of scooped inside. Now, often when we're gathering glass or in a big tank of glass like this, there'll be hidden bubbles. Just the layering of glass, the dripping of stuff back in. Every once in a while, it'll lap over itself and trap a little air. Now, air will travel up in that glass and eventually get to the surface and pop. But we did scrape it to make sure that that first layer had no bubbles, just scraping along the surface of that glass before he gathered. And I feel like I just jinxed it by even bringing it up, because it turns out we got a little bubble in that next layer. So he's going to dig that little bubble out. So reaching in with some tweezers, grabbing it with the shears, and just snipping it right out. You got to work pretty quickly to do something like that. If you end up waiting too long and all that heat from the fresh gather has soaked into the cord, well, the whole thing's going to get all wiggly on you while you do that. And if you end up having to dig real deep, you could actually grab the color and start disturbing that color layer. So typically you're going to not do too many heroic moves when it comes to removing bubbles. Try to get the ones that are only right on the surface of the glass if possible. And it's only possible in the first couple seconds where that outside layer is so fluid. You might have also noticed Tom just dunked his hand in water before he did that move as well. There's a lot of radiant heat coming off of this material. And so we sometimes dip our hands in water to do what we call a water glove. Just gives you a little extra seconds of protection before you start to feel the heat. He's also added a sleeve to his repertoire here, putting that Kevlar sleeve on his arm. That's going to help protect him from the radiant heat coming off of that material as well. Now Jason's going to start opening and closing doors, assisting on this, and he might actually grab a paddle on occasion just to shield Tom from that intense heat. So with all that heat talk, you might be wondering, well, why aren't we wearing gloves then if it's so hot and so dangerous? Well, my response to that is, have you ever tried to do anything with gloves on? Right? It's really tricky. It takes away all your dexterity. And Tom can't stop turning the whole time that you're working. So in general, we don't wear gloves on a regular basis for average size pieces because it takes away that dexterity, the ability to move freely on the pipe. And you can often have an assistant or someone shield you for the few moments here and there that you'll be really close to that intense heat. So one thing that is a little difficult to tell is when he's actually inflating. So I just want to remind everybody that we're using this alternate inflation device here today. So he's tapping on a pedal down below the bench. That activates just a small puff of air into that piece. So as it starts to get bigger or you see it changing shape quite a bit, chances are he's adding air pressure into there. We've been using this system and been so commonplace, I didn't really think about how it might have been perceived from the other angle until a very young gentleman asked earlier. He's like, well, how does that newspaper make it bigger? Well, it's not the newspaper making it bigger. We're actually inflating the glass as we're using the newspaper to help shape the glass as it's being inflated. So containing it and help direct where it will inflate. He can push and squish with that paper to keep things compact. He can point the tip of it up to give more thickness right at the end of the piece. Most of glass blowing is not the success of the moment. It is the conditions that you set up for the success that you want to have. So there's a lot of constant acclimation that's happening when we're working with glass, responding to temperature changes and color differences. Even from the morning till night, the reheating chamber might be a few degrees different. So that's going to change a lot of your pace of timing. So now that we've got a great foundation, now George gets the privilege of babysitting. He's going to just let this glass cool down and stabilize a little bit. Meanwhile, as he's watching this glass, making sure it's not getting too hot or too cold, Tom is going to start up the decorative element. So we've got these beautiful meandering cane pattern on the outside of this vessel. There's actually one on each side. He wrapped it around both sides. So to make that pattern happen, it took a lot of prep work to get that to that place. Do we have any of your little canes out here? I don't think we do. So we're using cane to make this happen. Now, a traditional basic cane would just be a blob of glass. You pull between two irons. That's going to give you a long string of glass. Maybe I'll set that on the table so we can talk about it together. So a long string of glass can be made just by pulling between two irons. You get a long layer. You chop that up. That length is called a cane. Now, if we want to embed color, we could start out with white glass and then gather clear glass over top of it. And then when you pull those together, then you're going to end up with a core of white surrounded by clear. Now we can take that cane and make other more complicated cage and helix style canes, just using that as a material. You gather 2 or 3 of them together, you put clear glass all around the outside, and this time as you pull apart from each other, you twist. And that twist will give you either the helix on the inside if you started with it at the core, or it'll give you that cage effect around the outside if you end up rolling them onto the surface of a blob of glass. So he's done some prep work by pulling some of these white canes. So now that he's got all of those canes pulled, he's chopped them up and he's put them into another babysitter. We got a lot of glass babysitters around here. We've got a pickup box on the far end of the stage. And inside there, he has put a small optic mold and put a little piece of cane down in each one of those ridges. Now this is a very large version of the optic mold that I'm talking about. So you can see how the peaks and valleys inside of there. So he's tucked in a little piece of cane inside of each one of those little ridges. They've got to be warm, one, to not explode as they warmed up slowly, but also not to explode when he touches them with hot glass. So he's pre-shaping a little bit of clear molten glass into a nice cone shape so that he can squish it down inside of all those canes, and when he comes out, they'll all be attached to the outside surface of that clear glass. So this is a perfect example of one of those moments where it's not the success of the moment, it's the precursor setup to set up the conditions for success at the moment. So he's shaped this in a very specific way. He even cooled the tip of it for a hot second in a little bit of water and had all that prep work ready to go. Now we are using a very specific kind of white as well. This Duro cane is formulated, or Duro white is formulated to be extra stiff. And this is really nice for doing cane work like this because no matter how small you end up pulling it, and as you pull cane, it starts as a package, you pull it, it's thinner. You add more cane to another package, you pull that, that's going to make it even smaller. So the beautiful part of that cane is the fact that it will not dissipate. It'll stay as a strong linear quality the whole time. So there we go. Beautiful pickup. I know Amanda was standing right in front of the camera, but you're going to put that on social media there? Yeah, awesome. Those stuff cups, whether it's a stuff cup or a cane like this, there's always this exciting moment. And actually, we should give him a big round of applause for a job well done on that. That was really smooth. I know that was one of the moments he was a little nervous about and making sure it all went just well, and I think that went smashingly. So now that he's got those canes on the surface, now he'll start melting them in and create a package. We're going to take this hot glass package and stretch it around that bubble. That's how we get this beautiful linear quality on the surface. So in some ways, he's going to be painting with glass, with all those little lines on the surface, wrapping it around. Now, right now, they're all straight lines. So by the time he gets them wrapped around, he'll also do some further manipulation to give that meander to the design. And this is really where the kind of impromptu excitement comes in. Each one is very unique in the way that it blows out, but even the application of these colors can change drastically the imagery of the object depending on how it's laid over. So as they fold and stretch and meander on top of each other, you'll get some really interesting patterns. But while he's warming this up, while he's getting this concise, I feel like we've covered quite a bit. Do we have any questions out there? Any curiosities that I can answer for anyone? We've got our online presence, had a couple good questions, and keep those coming if you have them. Nothing here in-house? Oh, you got one over here? Yeah, can you overheat the glass? To a certain extent, yes, if you can overheat it. One, you can only get it as hot as you can control it. So some glass workers, if you watch someone who's got a lot of years of experience, they seem to work with just nuclear hot glass. They can work quickly and efficiently and be able to keep it magically on center the whole time. You watch a beginner, that's a whole nother conversation. So they try to get it hot, but they don't quite know how to do the dexterity to keep things moving, so they'll end up dripping it and moving it around. But if you get it too hot, maybe even in your furnace, then you can start to change its chemistry. You start cooking out some of the chemistry that makes it the kind of glass that it is. So when we're using our glass, we try not to get that furnace too hot for too long because it'll end up burning away some of the flux. It'll start making a stiffer glass. And if you end up recycling a lot of glass, mixing in, you try playing with those chemistries, you're going to get a really persnickety glass. Now, when we start seeing striations form, they kind of look like snot bubbles inside. It's actually thicker glass and thinner glass all kind of moving at different paces. And that can cause cracks to form in your work as you're making it as well. So trying to keep those chemistries just right is really important. Yeah. Yeah, how is he not burning his hands holding on to a hot rod with glass on it? Well, one is the type of metal that the pipe is made from. If it was made from copper, that would heat up all the way, and there was no way you could hold on to it. But this is made of stainless steel, and stainless steel as a metal dissipates its heat a lot nicer. So they're only holding where it's shiny. You can see, well, there's a shiny and kind of a dark end. Now, we call that dark end the hospital zone. If you grab hold of that, chances are you're going to take a quick trip to the hospital, yeah. But where we hold on to them, they're perfectly safe and perfectly cool. All right, here's the exciting wraparound to get that beautiful pattern. He grabs the tip to give it a good spiral. This is overlapping visually those wrapped colors or those striations. When he has, oh, look at that beautiful heat there. Got a really nice even pull. And then he'll stick it down and wrap it all the way around. And have George help him by snipping it free. Very nice. That deserves a big round of applause. Whew. So he made it look so effortless, just holding it up, and somehow magically it all turned into this perfect, even little snake, right? It's not perfect, even snake that comes by magic. It comes by talent. It really has to have, again, those perfect conditions to set up to get that nice, even pull. So now we've got this surface thing hanging out. Remember that core bubble was left really cold. So that means that the bit is really hot right now, and the core of that piece is fairly stable. So this gives him an opportunity to try to warm this up even further, and hopefully the wrap will be the only thing hot so he can push and squish it around and give us just the perfect meander on the outside of that piece. You had a question?
Yeah, someone wanted to know why Tom was cooling the tip before he was putting the piece into the furnace.
Great question. So why did he dunk it in water or cool the tip before he went back into the furnace for more heat? Now, everything that we do is temperature dependent. And where we get it hot, it moves. Where we keep it colder, it doesn't. And as you're heating material, you might notice that everything's attached to a pipe. So when you enter that heating zone, the tip goes in first and comes out last. So the tip's always going to want to be the hottest part. So by counterbalancing that natural tendency, by cooling the tip of that glass and maybe even heating what's closer to the pipe on occasion, that's just all in pursuit of creating that even pull and that even movement of the glass. And those are the kind of things that really, again, come through experience. He has pulled a lot of cane, made a lot of vessels, made a lot of production, and knows how to set up those conditions to get things to pull nice and evenly. So here's a little shielding. Those wooden paddles are only serving to make this process a little more comfortable for Tom as he works. And just using a pair of tweezers to grab and pull and push and squeeze to get that beautiful zigzag pattern. It's mesmerizing, isn't it? I love it. Very nice. So now that he's got that pushed and pulled around the edge, you can see how where those tweezers maybe kind of dug in our final design here. And what I really love about these linear patterns is the interplay of the overlap that takes place on these as well. So everywhere he pushed and overlapped it onto each other, we're going to melt it all in and get it all smooth, but you'll be able to see that little bit of distance. Because remember, those canes are on the very outside of a solid blob of glass. So there's at least an inch of glass between the outside cane and the one hidden underneath the bottom. So that optical quality is really one of the lovely parts of this glass piece as well. And he leaves it a little thicker. Now, he could choose to blow it out thinner. That's completely valid. It's really up to the gaffer. It's really up to the designer. But when you're looking at thicker glass, that's going to, of course, have different optical qualities than thinner glass. Our colors would start to wash out. We might see through that purple and start to reveal the red inside if he blows it out too thin. So it's making those decisions on design that really have to be done pretty early in the process. If you blew it out too big, too thin, there's not really much you can do to consolidate it back. There's a little bit of a shrinkage you can do, but not that much. So any other questions so far? Yes? Yeah, where do you go to learn glass blowing? Now, traditionally, it would have been a factory job. It would have been male-dominated, of course, but there's not that many factories left that are training folks. So most contemporary glassworkers are learning in two different kinds of styles. One would just be independently. Now, here at the Corning Museum of Glass, we have the studio of the Corning Museum of Glass, which is one of the best places to learn, of course. We are a world-renowned educational facility that offers classes, workshops. Anybody doing a make-your-own while you're with us here today? So it's great. It's a great opportunity to get your hands on the material and just kind of learn to play with it. But you can also take those more intensive classes, building up your skills. Jason's happens to be teaching a class here soon, and flame working. George will be teaching a class in January about large-scale glass blowing. So it's a great opportunity to just learn that way. But a lot of contemporary glassworkers are also learning in universities. So universities offering Bachelor of Fine Arts degrees or material studies, kind of depends on the program. And that's really where Tom learned how to blow glass. He attended Alfred University, one of our local universities here, not too far away. That's also one of the top universities in the country for glass making. But each program will also cater to slightly different styles. So it's not necessarily one being better than the other, it's what you're personally interested in. So some programs will focus more on glass blowing. Others will focus a little bit more on casting or fused glass and cold working. So it's just finding the kind of university and the teacher and the people involved in that university to really get you excited to do the kind of glass that you want to work with. But most of us, started out in university earning a bachelor's. There's also a Master of Fine Arts. I happen to go to a university gaining both of those. And then you can also, there's 2 universities in the world that offer PhDs in glass. So a little more rare and not as necessary depending on what you're going to go into as a field. Great question, though. Any other questions? Yes? What fires these furnaces? These are all forced air gas systems. We have our innovation stage upstairs, which you might have seen a demonstration up there today. They are using all electric equipment up there. So you can use both, kind of just depends on your personal preference and your energy usage in the region. I would say gas-fired is certainly more common in the glass community. The fact that we have an all-electric reheating chamber is very unique to Corning. The Corning Museum specifically. We developed that technology to allow us to blow glass in locales that wouldn't allow open flame. So developing for working out at sea. We were out at sea for about 10 years demonstrating on cruise ships. We did a barge project a few years ago celebrating glassmaking coming to this region via barge. So we recreated that whole journey and demonstrated along that pathway. And so that required us using all electric versions of that equipment. So it looks like we've gotten that all squished in. So now that it's nice and solid along the surface, we'll be able to gather over top of that once again. Are you gathering again, or are you just getting it? Yeah. So there's actually quite a bit of texture left on the surface now that I see. And if he just keeps getting it hot and squishing it, well, the whole thing's all squishy. So it's not going to really shape it up. But if you let that bubble cool down and stabilize and then go back into the heat, well, the surface will get hot first. So he's stabilizing this glass right now so he can go back into the furnace, get it nice and hot on the surface, and then when he goes to smooth it out, that will be moving and have the structure of the core of the bubble to be able to push against to help flatten out that texture. We want to make sure that before we gather over top of this, we have a nice, smooth, even surface. Any texture left on the surface of that glass, when you go into our furnace, the glass is very fluid like honey, but it doesn't really like to fill in the nooks and crannies and textures on the surface. So as you wind it down into that liquid material, they lap over those textures and trap little bits of air in between each one of those dents. So it's a great way of doing a purposeful bubble pattern, taking a mold, making a lot of even dents on the surface of your internal bubble, gathering over top of it, trapping little air bubbles inside. But as you saw earlier, we were picking bubbles out because we don't want extra bubbles. We want a nice pristine black surface with that graphic white on the top without any bubbles disturbing that visual. So we'll take a little extra time making sure things are nice and smooth. It's some of the longest parts in glass, just waiting for it to cool. Yeah, it's like watching paint dry, you know. It's not the most interesting part, but it's also a necessary step for the success of that future piece. Yes, question? Ooh, that's a great question. Do any of us that work here sell things independently? Yes, all of us do exactly that. Now, we can't make glass at work to sell here in the shops or elsewhere, so we'll rent time at that studio next door. That is a public access studio allowing us to make glass for ourselves and sell it. Now, George, he's been in the game for over 30 years. He has a small studio set up in his home, so when he goes home at night, he can just turn that furnace on and play around for a few hours and makes a lot of production throughout the year. So Tom is also a highly skilled and very prolific glass worker. So he has got a lot of product available, not only here at the shops. The shop here at the Corning Museum of Glass does represent a lot of the local and regional artists. And so all of us have pumpkins and vessels and all kinds of things that are sold through that shop. But he also has a very successful online business, Etsy shop, and does a lot of traveling to different venues to sell his glass during art fairs and things like that. So absolutely, look up Tom Ryder. And I'm blanking on the name of your Etsy site. What was that? Blue Cow Glass? Blue Cow Glass. So you can look that up, or we can talk. Blue Pal Glass. I knew it had something to do with blue, but I couldn't remember the second half of it. So he's got a couple different ways you can purchase glass from Tom Ryder, for sure. But yes, our shops here does a wonderful job representing a lot of artists. And especially the last year, it's been a very challenging year for a lot of people. And they've done a real big push to really support the local glass workers that are here in this region. So they're carrying more product than they ever have from local artists here in the shop. So when you go into the shop, you can look, there's a lot of cases that have blue on them. Those represent some of the local artists. We also have a lot of signage that'll lead you to the right place. And we have a pretty robust online presence as well. So those of you that are home that may be too far away to be able to come and visit the museum in person, we also have a lot of online sales and made record sales over the last year. So we're really excited to see that part of our business start to grow and support the museum as a whole, because we're very fortunate to, of course, still be here and still be up and running and doing what we love and sharing what we love with the community. So if you'd like to collect any of the items made, of course, by Tom, I don't know if this one will end up in the shop or not. It might not. Some of our special demos end up being in the shop as well. So we do these live streams a lot throughout the year, and we're just ramping back up. We just kind of closed down our busy season, the summer season. There's generally not a lot of time available because of all of the events and the visitation that we get throughout the summer. So we don't always have a lot of these special events like we have throughout the slightly quieter months. So we're going to start up not only these live streams, Tom being the first of the fall live streams, featuring special visiting artists, in-house artists, featuring some of our employees here at the museum as well. We also have our You Design It program that will be starting up here in a few weeks. You Design It is a wonderful program we've done here for decades. And essentially, it is you design it. You draw us a picture of something you love and think would be amazing in glass. And then we choose one of those drawings to make it in front of the crowd that's here. But with the last year, with all of these online and virtual opportunities, we decided to put that, open it up, not just to folks that came to visit in-house, but pretty much anywhere you could submit a drawing. So keep an eye on our social media, and of course our website is really the best go-to place to find the links, to find the listings of all the live streams that we're having. And if you want to participate in that You Design It program, you can submit a drawing. Each session will have a particular theme. Our first one will be fall themed, pumpkin spice and everything nice. So as you're out adventuring and seeing all the lovely fall adventures with your families and friends, you can start thinking of the fun things that you think might look great in glass and submit one of those drawings. And then we choose that drawing and we'll make that over another live stream that you can tune into either live or over the internet. And the winner of that competition also gets to keep that piece if we make it. And so you can have it shipped to you if you are from far away or if you're here locally. They'll just notify you a day or two before the event and let you know that your drawing was chosen, and then you can watch or come and visit and watch that piece being made. All right, so you can see we've got a really nice smooth bubble here now. All that texture has been melted in. Using a bit of this air. This is a much higher air pressure than what we use to actually inflate the glass. It is really just using it to help counterbalance those temperatures we were talking about. Cooling and stabilizing the glass where he needs it not to move around. I love when you start getting all these patterns. They get so dizzying. I feel like you're just trying to hypnotize us, Tom. Get excited about glass. So in addition to our amazing live streams, we also have a couple of special events and demonstrations here associated with our exhibitions that are opening up. We've had 2 exhibitions open up over the last year. One is in Sparkling Company. It's amazing, and you can check a lot of stuff out online as well. If you are from far and wide, we've done a lot of social media posts about it and things on our website, but it is a really great show. And because it was scheduled to be put up during our shutdown, we had a lot of extra time to add extra things to that exhibition as well. So there's this really lovely virtual component to it where you can essentially feel like you're in one of the old drawing rooms. It's all about fancy English culture and the price of that, of the cost of that high society. Really tying in the sugar trade, the slave trade, and it's the development of mirrors. So mirrors were becoming very popular, so fashion really started to explode. So there's some really interesting pieces in that show, and definitely worth checking out either in person or online in some of that content. We also have in Fire and Vine, and Fire and Vine is celebrating winemaking in the local region and also all of the accoutrements that go with that process, both storage and producing, and of course the drinking of wine. So we've collected a few really beautiful examples out of our collection and put them all into that show of various wine drinking and storage vessels throughout history. So it's a really lovely addition to your visit here at the museum. So going in for the big guy right there, that final gather. This is one of my favorite moments when we have beautiful texture and designs on the underside and that thick optics of the fresh hot glass on the surface. That's a beautiful picture time for social media there. Amanda's getting it right on it. But a beautiful last gather on that piece. This is our pipe cooler. We had a lot of questions and concerns about holding the pipe in the proper place so you don't get burned. Well, if you want to hold it even closer, you can just cool that pipe with that pipe cooler. Really, the closer you can hold to that pipe, or to the glass rather, the weight of the material, the lighter it will feel. Because he might only have about 10, 15 pounds of glass on the end of that iron. But if you put it onto a 4-foot pole and hold it far away from you, it's going to feel a heck of a lot heavier than that 10 to 15 pounds. So we're often trying to work as ergonomic as possible because, of course, glass blowing is the complete opposite of ergonomic working. We're always carrying heavy weights on one side, leaning over one direction, reaching out really far. Chiropractors and massage therapists love glass blowers for sure. So we try to do things to make it a little bit more better on the body. All right, so we've got an answer to our question earlier of how many gallons does it make up to 1,000 pounds of glass? And according to our calculations, we think approximately 48 gallons of glass inside of our furnace. That's a fun little side note there. I don't think I've ever thought of glass as being a gallons of glass. Now there is, if I'm doing casting and things, I might do some water displacement and figuring out how many volume-wise to have melted glass, but that's really fun. Thanks for researching that for us. So now we've got all the glass we need. Now it's about setting up those conditions. You can see the heat of this material. The tip is so much hotter than the back end. So we're going to be doing a lot of things to help balance out those temperatures, making sure it moves where we want it to move. So not only using air, but using the Marver table. This is really where the Marver table comes into its own. We use that as a big slab of steel to be able to shape our glass, but being made of steel, it's also a heat suck. So it'll suck heat right out of that material and help us counterbalance those tendencies. You'll also start to see more and more teamwork taking place now. When you when you start scaling up on the size of the work, that's a lot of torque. If it gets a little off center, it takes even more torque to get it back on center because of that weight. So a lot of times when you're seated at the bench, you train yourself only to use one hand to turn the pipe. Beginners don't have that same kind of dexterity, and they want to grab with their right hand. That's the quickest way to get yourself burned, grabbing hold of the glass anywhere near that hospital zone. So instead of having to turn everything with one hand, he'll have George helping out here. George will help balance out and help him turn the pipe and make sure that he's a little more comfortable. So especially on larger scale work, you'll often see a secondary person getting involved, helping carry the weight of the material and passing that back and forth. So next comes the jack line. Even though we're not very far in the shaping process, we need to at least start establishing our jack line. These constrictions at the top of vessels, in between solid glass for sculpture, we need to narrow down an area and tell it where we want the glass to break eventually. So this is easiest accomplished early in the process. While the glass is really hot and moving, he can squeeze in that line with a pair of jacks. It's not that creative in the way that we title the jack line just because we're using a jack tool, but it is a perfect tool to incise that nice tight constriction line. Ooh, that's some good video work right there. It gives some interesting angles. They're also holding it down at the same time, so gravity is affecting that piece the whole time. If they're level and they spin fast, centrifugal force will start widening that piece. If they hold it up, it'll start to compress. So gravity and inflation and spinning, that's all constantly affecting the glass as we work. So even the speed in which you turn and the angles that you hold that pipe, it's going to highly influence that final shape. And I think that's another thing that takes beginners a little bit of time to try to figure out. You get really excited that things are going well and you start spinning really fast while you're in that reheating chamber, and all of a sudden you come back and you got a flattened bubble instead of a nice round one. But George has been working with glass for over 30 years. Tom's coming in on about 16, 17 years of work. Jason's kind of our newbie, but still having about 7 years of glass making experience, and highly skilled flame worker as well. His class in a couple months will be all flame working. But we got a lot of experience, a lot of understanding of how the principles of glass works. So they'll make this look fairly effortless, even though we're dealing with a lot of glass on the end of the iron. Now, one of the other really nice aspects of this design that he's putting together is that he's leaving a little extra thick glass at the very bottom. We call this ice on the bottom of the glass. It looks like a little bit of ice thickness. But this is a really nice design element as well. Narrowing down the tip of that bubble, it'll be able to cold work that into place, giving it a nice flat surface. But having that little extra glass at the bottom gives a nice visual lift to this piece. But you have to, again, remember about the tip of the bubble being the hottest thing. So every time we go to inflate, that tip's going to want to disappear the whole time. So they're doing quite a bit to help counteract that. Holding it with the paper, chilling it with the marver, chilling it with the air, just to make sure that we can keep that little bit of ice on the bottom.
Yeah, you want both of them or just one?
So it sounds like maybe it's getting a little hotter, so we're going to layer up some more sleeves here. The black sleeve that he's wearing is made of Kevlar, and that's a pretty good heat resistance. But when you start to get scaling up hotter and hotter, or bigger and bigger, that radiant heat can really get distracting, let's say. If you feel like you're catching on fire, it's really hard to concentrate on what you're trying to shape at the time. So as the pieces start getting larger, we also want to give ourselves plenty of room to get in and out of this reheating chamber as well. Sure. Ooh, we're going to go for the flattening now, I think. So we've got some cork paddles. So we're going to use some cork paddles. These are just chunks of cork with wooden handles. And cork is a really good material for helping to shape glass. He keeps them moving so they don't leave any kind of scar mark or burned material onto the glass itself. That's another great social media moment there. Good pictures. I'm coming behind you. Yeah, let's give him a big round of applause. Very nicely executed. Got enough room there? You need another door. You got enough. So what a beautiful transition there. I love flattening these pieces because it really creates more of a canvas on the sides of each of these of this vessel. So now we've got a beautiful view of that beautiful canes drawing on the side. George is flipping back and forth. He's really keeping an eye on keeping everything straight for Tom. I'm capping the pipe so that it doesn't collapse. We don't want to trap too much air in there. As air gets hot, it expands. As it cools, it'll shrink and suck the piece in. So I'm just kind of capping it while he's pushing, and we just let the residual air that's in there create a little bit of structure to keep it from collapsing. Beautiful. Very nice. Oh, you guys got that one centered beautifully on both sides. That's always kind of a tricky thing. One, wrapping those designs all the way around the outside, or even getting all the marvering, all the movement, all the blowing it out, and keeping those graphics centered on a piece. Really shows off the skill of this team and their understanding of this material. So now that they're done with the bottom half, we've got a little bit of shaping to do on the top of this piece. So he's going to balance out these temperatures while George starts up the punty. Now most pieces are traded from one to another, one iron to another iron, about halfway through the process. Tom wants to make sure that this glass is just the right temperature, so he's doing all that counterbalancing, spraying a little air, putting a little torch, going for a good reheat. We want it to be nice and stable when we go to trade this over to the other iron. George wants to structure up a punty that will contact the bottom of this piece, but not truly bond to it. If we get it stuck too strongly, we might even break some of the piece away when we go to remove it. So it's all about setting up weaknesses. Glass will always break wherever it is the weakest. So if we can set up weaknesses and exploit them, we have a greater chance of glass breaking without shattering. That's weird. In the cameras, it looks really squat. I'm getting some optical illusions here. So it looks like we're going for a cold core punty. This just means that we're going to build up a much larger punty. But if we gather it all at once, then it's all the same temperature. It might be a little too wiggly. But he did a first layer and then cooled it down quite substantially. That way, the second layer will have a little more structure to it. So he'll shape this up once again. But that colder core will help balance out temperature a little easier. You can be hired or fired by your ability to make a good punty. It is a pretty critical step in the process. If you don't have the right balance of timing, temperature, and teamwork, it could fail catastrophically. And you can see how long this has been in setting up all that color, pulling those canes. There's a lot invested in this material and this piece. So you want to make sure that you're making a nice punty that'll hold that piece securely. Now again, he did leave the bottom of this rounded, so it wouldn't stand on its own. But he's going to cold work the very bottom of this piece flat when it's down to room temperature. That way he can get a very concise, small connection and not disturb any of that curve that's been set up and all that beautiful ice that he left on the bottom. We need to make sure that everything is just right. So George is kind of feeling the wiggle and resistance. When he feels it starting to stiffen up and he knows that they'll be able to support the weight of that material without it flopping around, that's the moment that he'll let Tom know to go ahead and break it free. So a little bit of water on that jack line. This starts a crack, that thermal shock that takes place. George gets in position, ready to catch that big heavy piece. And a light tap's all it took. Beautiful job. Very nice. Again, with all these years of experience, they make this whole process look pretty effortless. So now it's all about warming up the top half. Are you going to do that pull?
Yeah,
the same pull?
So, yeah.
All right. So on a piece that's this big and the shaping that he wants to do on the top, these two pulled tips, he really needs to work from the outside of the bench, getting the reach and being that so close to it with his face and his arms. It's really going to be much easier to work from the outside of the bench. So this is going to be some really great teamwork here. George is going to keep hold of the piece. He knows exactly where to heat it, how much heat he needs to be able to let Tom do what he needs to do. They'll need to coordinate their timing. Typically, a glass worker is turning the pipe so that their right hand can adjust the tools accordingly as they work. So there's tiny little stops and starts and flip arounds and adjustments that happen constantly. So having another glass blower turning the pipe for you offers a bit of a challenge. So they'll have a lot of communication happening while they're working. They might say turn or switch or go in the other direction, stop. They'll readjusting accordingly between two brains and two hands rather than just one. So first we'll coax it open just a little bit. Those jacks are not only used to incise the surface or that crease line at the top, we also use them kind of like the fingers of a potter in a wheel as it turns. We'll be coaxing this open as we spin. Now that he's got the width that he wants, he'll start coaxing those little peaks out of both sides. Now gravity is again working on it at all times, so it's quick little grabs, quick little movements. And from the first grab to the last grab, that glass is a different consistency. It's hardening up and stiffening up as you work. So if you just grabbed the first one and yanked and then tried to go back for the second one, the first one would pull really easily, the second one would pull really slowly, so they wouldn't match. So it's, again, recognizing those conditions and coaxing it into place. Do you want those doors closed while you're in there, George? Or are you all right? Okay. Now, before we got started here, Tom was talking about some of the other products that he's developed over the years. And he's been really interested in new product development. He's got a lot of series that already uses this black and red as being such a beautiful contrast, some bowls, some vases. So this is kind of fitting within his personal aesthetic, which is great, but also just pushing it a little bit further, adding in new elements like this cane pattern to the outside. That's one of the lovely things about working in glass is that there's a lot of things that happen almost as happy accidents as you're producing. You might make 10 of something, and then something goes awry, and you say, ooh, I like that thing that just went awry on the surface of that piece. So playing around with glass, doing similar things over and over, that's really going to help you develop the aesthetic and the skill necessary to make those final pieces. So a lot of people will think, oh, well, a commission, that'd be easy. You just make this one-off thing for me. But typically that takes a lot more effort than just making one-off thing. You might have to develop new technologies, new methodologies in how you approach glassmaking to be able to make something. So it's always good to find a glass artist that already makes similar work to what you're looking for. Each glassworker really starts to gravitate towards certain aesthetics and building up certain skill levels. So Tom and George both really enjoy working very large scale, really pushing those limits of glassmaking. And so you can see what a difference from the practice pieces that were quite small to this final one that he's doing here during this live stream. It's a much bigger piece, but it has that same kind of beautiful qualities to it, just scaled up. He was also talking about some of the earlier ones and how he likes the gestural quality of them all. So even the little bit of a twist that happened in one of the precursors, it still makes for a very dynamic piece. So now that these tips are pulled out really tall, George has to be really careful to not get those little tips too hot. They're very thin and delicate, so they'll heat up very quickly and also cool down very quickly. And a lot of times when we're reheating in that furnace, it's kind of hard to see what's farther away from you. But with those 30 plus years of experience, he knows an approximate amount of timing based on all the glass he's melted and broken throughout the years. So we'll use some torches to balance out those temperatures. I think we're coming in on the final details here of this beautiful piece. Jason's putting on some protective gear, including our baked potato suit here. This is a very heat-resistant suit. This is a lot of glass, a lot of weight, and a lot of temperature. We need to load this into an annealing oven to let it cool slowly. I'm actually going to move that fiber frax over a little bit. Is that what you're doing, Jordan? Got it? Pull that clear bottle? Okay. Yeah. So we just looked in our oven and we've got not quite enough room. So we're going to make a little room. We've got a clear demonstration piece that we can recycle. So we're just going to put that into a little bit of water. That'll break up into small pieces, and then we can recycle that glass, putting it back into our furnace, giving us plenty of glass to play with in the future. So now we've got enough room in the oven. We've also put just a piece of fiber frax in that oven. That'll help cushion the piece a little bit instead of setting the side of it onto the hard brick bottom of the furnace, which could leave dents in the surface of this beautiful piece. Instead, we put it on a little bit of fiber frax. But we need to make sure it's just the right temperature before we do so. Especially with black being so soft, we don't want to leave any impressions in the surface. So they're going to go for a couple flash heats, balancing out those temperatures. And then we can put it into our annealing oven for slow cooling. Now you'll want to keep an eye on our social media here and on our YouTube channel. This is a live stream that we've put over the internet, but within a week or so, we'll be able to put that entire video up onto our YouTube channel. And we often take pictures of the final piece and post them with that YouTube channel as well. So you can check out that final piece if you're not here locally to be able to stop by and see it tomorrow. Now, most likely it won't be out till late tomorrow or maybe even the next day. They're even deciding which side to be down and which side to be up. That way, if in case any little dents form, we don't have the nicest side having any texture. A little bit of water on that punty. This just helps with that separation.
That's about here. Come grab it like that. Big pancake. Ready?
And a light tap. I got this. Very nice. So they're just going to torch it, make sure there's nothing sharp, and then away into our oven it goes for safekeeping and slow cooling. Beautiful. And it's safe. Let's get a huge round of applause for Tom Ryder. Very nicely done. Quite a step up from your practice pieces. That's super exciting. So check out Tom. He's definitely got lots of things here for sale too if you want to have some other opportunities to collect Tom Ryder's work. And he's got his wife and child here as well watching the whole thing. So we would like to thank you all for joining us here in-house and of course online. Thanks for always tuning in with us from far and wide. Keep an eye on those social media posts. You'll have great images of this final piece. But thank you so much for joining us. Have a great evening.